Okay, now let's go to Nasrec. Senior reporter Siphamandla Goge was attending that media briefing at which Khalima Mutlante was reading out the names of the additional 80 members of the National Executive Committee of the governing party, the African National Congress. Good afternoon, Ncome. So how is the composition of the NEC list and what does it mean for those ANC members now deployed to government?
Well, according to the ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula and his deputy Nomvula Mokonyane, they are of the view that this is a well-balanced list. If you take into account that if you look at the top four of that list, it comprises of former leaders of the ANC Youth League, Sihle Zikalala, former Secretary General of the ANC Youth League, making it as number one. When it comes to that list, you've got Mduduzi Manana, Ronald Lamola, former Deputy President of the ANC Youth League, Mdumiseni Ntuli, who served in the youth structures of the ANC as well. But most importantly, and I think this is a progressive move in a sense that you've got more women represented in terms of this list of the National Executive Committee of the ANC. But there are those who will raise questions about what may be perceived as lack of representation in terms of alliance partners. I'm talking about senior leaders of the South African Communist Party, not too much of COSATU leaders, including their president Zingiswalusi is not there. The likes of Blade Nzimande, Thula Sinqesi, yes, in the past they were co-opted to be part of the NEC, but this time around they do not feature. However, you do have the likes of Buti Manamela, who did serve in the Young Communist League of the SACP, and other leaders like David Masondo. But there will be that outcry from alliance partners about lack of adequate representation. However, the ANC is of the view that this is the best list. But if you look at the number of names and people who feature in terms of this list, they're still facing some of the difficulties with the party. The likes of Andile Lungisa, who made it at number 11, as well as Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma at number 33. You still have Batabile Dlamini and Supramahuma Pilo. We all know that those are some of the names that voted against the party line when they were in parliament discussing the issue of President Cyril Ramaphosa over Phala following the release of the Section 89 independent panel report. So if you look at the composition of this list, a number of ministers did not make it back to the list. I'm talking about the minister responsible for international relations and cooperations. That will be Dr. Naledi Pandor, minister responsible for public enterprises. I'm talking about Pravin Gordhan. Does not feature here. Blade Nzimande does not feature. Thula Sinqesi as well. I'm not sure whether I saw the name of Natim Tetwa. I'm still going through the list here. So those are some of the names here, and that simply means at some point, taking into account how the ANC works in this regard, for instance, the top four will need to be accommodated in the executive. I know ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa has always been of the view that securing an election into the NEC of the ANC should not automatically mean a deployment to government, but there's no way he can ignore a number of people in this list. For instance, if you check that Sihle Zikalala number 1, Mduduzi Manana number 2, Ronald Lamola also serves there, so he's covered, but there's Mdumiseni Ntuli and others who form part of those who are highly ranked in this list may need to be accommodated in terms of deployments, and that's where President Ramaphosa's headache will come in. Now he needs to think about how to accommodate these NEC members. Why does the NEC of the ANC matter so much? It's simply because it's the highest decision-making body or structure in between conferences. This is a structure that meets and discusses important things that have to do with the organization. The officials of the ANC will meet and refer everything to the National Working Committee. The National Working Committee will refer everything to the NEC for finalization and final decision. So the NEC is very powerful, and if you check here, others were hoping that it will be pegged by loyalists of President Cyril Ramaphosa. It's not necessarily the case. I would say it's balanced. You've got those who did not support him. You've got those who were his staunch allies and supporters coming to this conference, but it's not really dominated by his allies. So it's going to be interesting to see what will happen when crucial issues that have got to do with the president are discussed. But let's take a listen to how the Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, responded when I asked him whether the president will be thinking about reconfiguring his executive, also taking into account that the deputy president of the ANC, Paul Mashatile, is not part of government. This is how Mr. Mbalula responded.
The president should be applying his mind about this cabinet. And the Secretary General, I will have a discussion with him, but it's his prerogative. He's got to think about cabinet. If he's not thinking about it, that will be reckless of him to do that. He is and should be thinking about it and how to strengthen the executive, because from our side, I want a cabinet that is breathing life to society and running. That is non-negotiable. So I think he should be doing that. And he's got the whole December to think, if he's not thinking about it. Somewhere in the beach, fishing and so on, thinking about what is going to happen. So I'm definitely sure that he's applying his mind, and we will discuss with the president, but it's his prerogative, because issues of cabinet, they've got a way that they are handled. Even myself as Secretary General, I still have to be inducted. In my experience as Secretary General of the Youth League, I've never dealt with the deployment of people in cabinet and so on. So it can be unilateral decision, but the SG and the president have got to engage on those issues. So it will definitely happen.
Siphamandla, you mentioned there earlier, before I ask you the next question, whether Nathi Mthethwa is on this new 80 member, the new additional members of the NEC. I've just gone through that list. I can't see his name here. I'm just referring to him because you particularly referred to him in terms of what's going ahead. I don't see Nathi Mthethwa's name here. Unyambo says he's not on this list. Now, will the new NEC, Siphamandla, deal with outstanding organizational issues from the previous NEC? One would assume there's lots.
Absolutely, and they will have to take into account all the recommendations, number one, of this 55th National Conference. But most importantly, there will be a handover report by the previous NEC to the newly elected NEC. And before they get to all those discussions, this is how it's going to play out. So the officials of the NEC will meet, and then once the NEC meets, then the NEC will need to appoint members of another powerful structure known as the National Working Committee of the ANC. The National Working Committee is responsible for the day-to-day running of the organization. That will be very interesting to see the composition of the NWC as well, but it can only be appointed by the NEC. Once they are done with all of that, now they'll have to go through all pressing organizational matters and the handover report to say what were the issues that were referred to the incoming NEC by the previous NEC, as well as conference resolutions. We know the issue of Phala Phala was deferred to the incoming NEC. That has got to do with the president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, and the scandal over Phala Phala that is refusing to go away. All the reports of the Integrity Commission, including the one on digital vibes on former Health Minister Dr. Zweli Mkhize, who made it back to the NEC of the ANC, by the way. All those reports will be dealt with by the incoming National Executive Committee of the ANC. But remember, all the committees of the ANC will have to be reconfigured, taking into account those NEC members that have been elected. So they will still need to appoint chairpersons of subcommittees, be it on health, on education, and on matters of economic transformation, and then other committees such as the Integrity Commission of the ANC will have to be reconfigured. But they will definitely have to discuss all the outstanding reports that were referred to the incoming NEC. This is how the Secretary General of the ANC, Mr. Fikile Mbalula, answered that question about their immediate task and also carrying on with the work that was left behind by the previous NEC. Let's take a listen.
Phala Phala has been dealt with in Parliament, and if anything that arises, we will deal with it as and when it comes up. From where we are seated, The matter has been handled by the public protector, has been handled by the law enforcement agencies. We will watch that space closely and then process it accordingly in the organization.
And Siphamandla, finally, we heard Fikile Mbalula, they're saying that the new top 7, the officials are going to have their first proper kind of meeting tomorrow. Will that be mainly to map out what's going to happen on the 5th of January when the 55th National Conference will reconvene in a hybrid manner to conclude its business, and also preparing for the January 8th statement?
Indeed, those are the two main priorities. So they will meet tomorrow and then plan what will happen when that conference reconvenes in a hybrid format on the 5th of January, but also go through all logistics plans, preparations for the powerful January 8th statement of the ANC, or should I say for the most important gathering of the year. Every year when they start the year with the January 8th statement of the ANC, and they will have to meet and plan this conference that they need to conclude, which was adjourned, and after that talk about the January 8th statement. So they don't have time in between. If you check that, they still have a lot to go through. But for that January 8th statement to happen, remember, the NEC of the ANC needs to have met, because the January 8th statement is the statement that is usually put together by the National Executive Committee of the ANC, and that is read out by the President of the governing party. So the NEC needs to conclude, or rather needs to conclude the conference first, and then after that they can plan and talk about the January 8th statement. So that meeting, which will be convened tomorrow by the officials of the ANC, is very important to deal with these immediate priorities.
Very much, Ngome. That's our senior reporter, Siphamandla Goge, there, live to us at NASREC. I guess for now we'll say for the last time, because the ANC's 55th National Conference has adjourned to resume on the 5th of January. Thank you very much, Siphamandla.